7:07. I'm Daedalus Howell. We're here with Aisha Jill Morgan. You know her from Santa Rosa City Schools, where she works in assessment, but she's also a participant in One Soul. Am I saying that right?
Of One Soul.
Of One Soul, which is part of the Interfaith Council of Sonoma County. Thank you for being here.
I'm
this is great.
Pleased to be here, Daedalus. Thank you.
Forgive me for stumbling through your intro. You do so many things. I have a bio. I'm going to show the people. It's huge. So, so I'm just cherry picking from many of the things that you do. But let's get your story, because I'm totally fascinated by people who find something that's so transformative, and that was your relationship, I believe, with Islam. Like, you discovered it, or it discovered you, and it changed your life.
Yes. And,
if I may presume.
Yes. And I don't know what makes a seeker. I don't know why one person is a seeker and one is not, why one is a risk taker and one is not. And somehow I have always been a believer in God and a seeker. And I don't know where it came from. My grandfather, who was a Baptist preacher in North Carolina, my uncles, I really am not quite sure. And I was very involved in my church life. When I arrived in Istanbul to do training for teachers for the U.S. Department of Defense, it was September of 2000.
And that's just fascinating in itself. You're traveling to train teachers on behalf of the Department of Defense.
I've been to 48 or 50 states, partly due to doing teacher training,
Yeah. And so you're in Istanbul.
I was in Istanbul, and I knew nothing about Islam.
Yeah.
As many Americans, especially then, didn't know anything.
And what happened?
My son, who was 15 at the time, had just been there.
Okay. And
said, "Mom, you're going to want to take a long skirt and long sleeves and a scarf so that you can go visit the mosques, because they're beautiful."
Oh, because there's modesty rules. Right?
Right. You know, when I was a kid, no woman went to church without covering her head.
Oh, interesting.
Christian church. It was just part of what one did.
But that was, I think, perceived as a fashion. Or am I incorrect?
And culturally, I think that a Muslim woman covering her head in some Muslim countries is a fashion statement, no question about it. I mean, I certainly chose a scarf to go with my shirt today. So.
Well, it's not just a fashion statement. These days it can be construed often as a political statement, right?
Yes. There was a woman at the convention who was interviewed on NPR this morning, Muslim
the DNC,
woman.
You're right,
Yeah, thank you, at the DNC, the convention.
Probably not the other convention. Who knows, actually,
Could have been.
Yeah.
And she was speaking about the fear factor, that every time something happens in the news, Muslims nationwide go, "Please God, don't let it be a Muslim."
Right. And oftentimes, or at least lately, the media covers events, and given their scale or given the particulars about those events, and as has happened recently, it has been a Muslim sometimes, or somebody claiming to be a Muslim.
Or having some relationship. Many of us feel that it's not our position to say that a person is or is not Muslim.
Fair enough.
That's God's decision. And of 1.5 billion Muslims, a quarter of the world's population, the vast majority of them are just normal folks trying to raise their families and do their work and pay the rent.
Why do you think there's so much coverage of the violence that occurs at the hands of people who are identified as Muslim?
Well, I have several theories, and one is that somebody always has to be the goat.
Mm-hmm.
We've always, and I've called it the goat without even calling it scapegoat, because there's no scape in it. It just is that somebody's got to be at the bottom of the heap and get kicked. In prior generations in the United States, it's been Italians or Jews or Russians or Irish or It's always somebody, it seems
English, like John.
Even the German.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly John.
Could be, yeah.
Actually, it was just about John, frankly. But yeah. Conversely, though, why is there violence being perpetrated by these individuals in the name of Islam?
Well, I'm not sure that it's in the name of Islam.
Okay.
I'm not sure that we and the media aren't just attributing them to be a religion.
That's a good point. I could be conflating ISIS, for example, with Islam, which is two different things.
And if they think they're Muslim, God help them.
Right.
Because that's not the Islam that I or anybody I know in Santa Rosa buys into.
Yeah, certainly. Can you identify for us some of the tenets of Islam?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I do is I'm a volunteer speaker for Islamic Networks Group, which is an organization been around 22 years. And we go into the schools and we do interfaith panels and we talk about Muslims and Islam in America.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of facts at my fingertips.
I'd imagine, yeah.
There are 6 core beliefs, and there are 5 what are known as pillars, and people often hear the pillars, and the pillars are actually discussed in the textbooks for middle school in the history classes. Okay. Muslims believe that Islam is the continuation and the culmination of the Abrahamic tradition.
And the Abrahamic tradition has 3 spurs altogether?
Well, we'll say 3,
okay.
But starting with Prophet Abraham, the message that was delivered to Abraham and to Moses, the scrolls and the Torah, are mentioned repeatedly in the Quran.
Right.
The message to Jesus in the Christian tradition, the gospel, called in Arabic the Injil, mentioned repeatedly throughout the Quran. So Muslims believe in the one God, the same God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Jesus and Moses. And that culmination comes to Muhammad as a prophet, and he is the last of the Abrahamic line of prophets. And that is, in general, a belief. There are variations on that, but in general, Sunni Islam, the majority Islam, will believe that Muhammad is the seal of the nectar, the final prophet. Muslims believe in the same angels. So Angel Gabriel, who delivered over the course of 23 years of Muhammad's life, would come to him periodically and deliver God's word, which results in the Quran, word for word. And Muslims believe in the prophets, what I mentioned. Muslims believe in the books I mentioned. And that the people who believe those books, the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims, are related as people of the book.
Why do you think there's so much disconnect, though, sometimes, between, if there's such a shared sense of core values and even written tradition?
Right.
Right.
Right. Is it lack of understanding, or is it anything different than Bosnia-Herzegovina?
Yeah, let's come back to that in a second. It's 7:07. We're with Aisha Jill Morgan, and we'll be right back. And we're back on 7:07 with Aisha Jill Morgan. We're talking about the interrelation between the Abrahamic religious traditions, the intersections in the disconnects that have occurred, at least that have been perceived to occur. Can we talk about that? Why, since they share so much, that they're perceived as being so different, these traditions?
I'm not a scholar, so I'm just an ordinary person. So it's a little hard for me to answer some of these questions when they're grand questions.
I know, and you're being put on the spot as a spokesperson.
Right.
Right.
I'm it right in this moment.
Yeah, and it's not fair, and it's very reductive, and I understand that.
And it's okay. I think the thing to remember is that there are normal people who follow a faith, and there are lots of them. And in America, we don't go around saying, "Oh, hi, I am Aisha, I'm Muslim."
Right.
And in some situations, it's quite obvious.
Right.
And those are situations where then I become visible as a spokesperson, and I can accept that to the extent that I can answer the question. What I do know, having lived in the Middle East a bit, is that there are cultural differences among Muslims that are true country to country to country, different cultures, even within a country, different. Certainly in Sonoma County, there are Muslims from so many parts of the world that Islam is practiced a little bit differently, or the dress is different, or the food is different, the way culture is different.
Right.
And the same thing is true of politics. So somebody has a beef, a problem they perceive, and they think they're doing the right thing.
Right.
And it's not for me to say it's wrong. It's not for me. I'm not in one bit interested in going to fight the infidels,
right.
which is a bogus phrase in and of itself. Jihad means a personal struggle in the path of God.
Mm-hmm.
And my personal struggle often will be to go find a mosque in whatever city I'm traveling to.
Right.
That's a jihad. To determine that someone has attacked me and that I am then, according to Quranic law, able to attack them is very specific. And if I amorphously think, oh, the West has ruined my life, so I can attack them freely, I don't think that's the reading of Islam the way it's supposed to be, but it's up to God. It's not my call.
The de facto spokesperson phenomena is interesting to me, right? Because we're in this position, we're talking on camera, and you are being asked to speak for an entire people's.
1.5 billion people, yes.
Yeah, by dint of the fact that I'm ignorant, and I'm sitting here and I'm asking you questions, right? But I think it's productive, ultimately.
I do too. One person at a time is productive.
So, do you feel a responsibility to introduce an understanding that...
everywhere I go.
How does that
all
work?
All the time.
I mean, you're never offended when somebody says, why are you wearing that?
Absolutely not. I wasn't even offended when a colleague of mine, at whose home I was having dinner, didn't say a word when her husband said, "Oh, you raghead." What? Oh, that is really, really out there. And she didn't say a word. And I was more offended by her not speaking up for me than I was by her husband being a stupid head.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Do you face that kind of prejudice?
Not much. And we have to be really honest here, Daedalus. I am in a position of being white in America. And
that's a different experience.
It is an entirely different experience.
Yeah.
I am a California girl, grew up in San Diego. I speak English and other languages, and I have the benefit of education. I have the benefit of confidence. And people don't mess with me much, but I have many friends who have felt looked at and attacked. And if people look at me, I smile. And I try to help, especially the women who wear hijab, to also do the same. Engage. Be open to people saying things like the lady in the supermarket who tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, do you speak English?"
Why did she ask? Why did she want to know?
Well, what do you think? I come from somewhere else.
Yeah.
I'm so different. So I must be a ferner.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you ever tire of that, though? You never did.
In a way, yes. And there are times where I want to have my energy back for myself. But my my being able to articulate and having the information at hand that I've learned by being a trained ING speaker
Right.
has become what I think is sort of my mission here, my path. And one of the things that I'm really happy to be doing is working with the Sonoma County Interfaith Council.
Yeah.
And we have a group that developed organically out of nowhere, people saying, we want to stand for Muslims in Sonoma County. We've had amazing events.
Wow.
We have August 28th dinner coming up for the Interfaith Council of Sonoma County that should be wonderful.
And this is one of the Of One Soul events.
Of One Soul is
Yeah.
a portion, is
Okay.
an active committee, essentially a campaign within ICSC, Interfaith Council of Sonoma County.
Okay.
And I've done a lot of speaking about Islam as part of our interfaith work.
You're sort of in a unique position because not only do you practice Islam, but you are a California native. You do have a sort of an immediate sort of recognition, I think, by other Californians, you know, or white people in that kind of thing.
All over the world, actually.
Yeah.
I have a funny line in Arabic when I am meeting someone. I will say, Ana California. I don't say I'm American, I say I'm Californian.
Right.
And they get it, and it's a joke.
Yeah.
They love it.
Let's talk about your discovery of Islam, right?
Oh, back to Istanbul.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's...
So I had been, like I said, I'd been a seeker of internal spiritual things. I had done yoga actually since high school or college. And there I was in Istanbul. I knew nothing. I had traveled in China. I'd been to temples. I'd been through Europe to magnificent cathedrals.
Did you know you were looking for something spiritual?
No,
Okay.
not at all. I knew that I had some questions about my practice. And
you were a Christian at that point.
correct.
Yeah.
Born to a Jewish mother, so I have, as my sister says, I've been part of all the world's great religions there. And I walked into the Blue Mosque, the Jama Sultan Ahmed in Istanbul, with my little scarf on, and I looked up 140 feet to the top of the dome, and I started to cry.
Oh, wow.
And I had no idea why. And I'd been to all these other beautiful places in the world, and I hadn't cried. So when I came back to Roanoke Park, where I live, I immediately went to the library and checked out a couple of books. And fascinatingly, I found answers to a couple of the questions that had been gnawing at me.
Local libraries, God bless them.
Yeah, exactly. Thank goodness, Sonoma County Library.
But so what were the questions, can I ask?
Well, one of them had to do with prayer. What is allowed to ask for from God? Can I ask God, help me pass this test or this goal that I have, or a deadline? Is that okay, or is that too mundane? And is it okay to be informal with God? Is it okay to say, hey God, we're just here on this baseball team and we're just hoping you're going to look out for us today? Because I had been with a women's sports team and I felt that was so informal in my relationship with God that I was uncomfortable. And I had other questions and came to learn that in Islam, to ask anything of God that is legal in any language is acceptable.
That's excellent.
And then I learned about the 5 prayers a day.
Oh, well, let's get back to that in a second. We're with Aisha Morgan. I'm Daedalus Howell on 7 to 7. We'll be right back. We're back on 7 to 7 with Aisha Morgan. We had just left off discussing the 5 prayers a day that you learned while reading the book.
I did. And the 5 prayers a day are very physical.
Okay.
It's standing and then bowing and then prostrating, going down with the forehead and the nose and the hands on the floor.
Okay.
Well, didn't I mention I'd done yoga?
Oh, right, of course.
So
right.
for me, it's like doing yoga 5 times a day.
Can I ask, do you use a yoga mat?
To make my prayers?
Yeah.
No, I use prayer mat.
Okay.
I have lots of them. I made the Hajj to Mecca, and I came back with lots of prayer mats that have the picture of the Kaaba, the square.
I was
block
just making
building.
a dumb joke, so forgive me. But the nature of the prayer itself, 5 times a day, how do you know when to do it, and what occurs while you do it?
Well, how do I know?
Yeah.
I have an app, of course.
There's an app for that. I should have known.
There are many.
Yeah, that actually alerts you?
1.5 billion Muslims in the world.
Right.
There's bound to be a market.
So there's an app, and I would imagine it directs you where to face, right?
Yes, there's
It's got
a compass on it, exactly. I do have sort of an internal GPS, so I know what direction generally. And the app is very helpful in a hotel room at night. Yeah.
And is there like something you meditate on that I can ask you about?
Well, the prayer is very regular.
Okay.
It is saying, it's in Arabic. It took me a good while to learn it, and knowing me, I needed to study to know what I was saying.
Yeah. Are you fluent?
Oh gosh, no,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
And I understand what fluency is because
You speak other language. Yeah, that's.
But that was my work, was knowing if students were fluent in English,
That's
and
right.
I know I'm not fluent in Arabic. In fact, I study a very formal Arabic, which is more to read the Quran than to talk.
I see. Yeah.
But the first surah of 114 books of the Quran is 7 verses long, and it's repeated in every cycle of prayer.
Okay.
So there are, for instance, in the early morning, which is now the prayer comes in around 4:40, and it goes until around 6.
Wait, 4:40 a.m.
Yeah, and in the summer, when the days are longer, it's earlier.
Oh wow.
And in the winter, the days are shorter. So it has to do with dawn. It has to do with the sun.
Okay.
And the first morning prayer is 2 optional prayers, one cycle. It takes maybe 2 minutes. And then 2 prayers, which are the required prayers. And that can take 2 minutes, or it can take 5 minutes, or it can take 10 minutes, depending on how much of the Quran one wants to recite.
Okay.
And in congregation, when people are in a mosque or a home together, standing shoulder to shoulder, facing the Kaaba, the person leading the prayer is the one who decides what to recite. And he could make it very, very long, and people could stand for a long time. And there's stories about the Prophet Muhammad standing until his feet were sore or bleeding because he would recite so much.
Wow.
I know many people who've memorized the entire Quran, all 6,000 plus verses.
Wow.
Yeah. For me, I'm happy that I've memorized enough to do my prayers, maybe 12 or 15 pages.
You can do 12 or 15 pages in this particular dialect of Arabic.
In Quranic Arabic,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, it's sort of like Shakespearean English in
Wow.
a way, I gather.
Obviously, you have a very rich intellectual life, right? Always have.
Thank you to my father and my grandfather and
Your
my mother.
ability
Yeah.
to wade into what was at one point a different culture and to absorb it seems completely.
Oh, well, I recognize it. It's interesting that you say absorb it. I recognize it.
Okay. Yeah, perhaps that's a clumsy way to phrase it.
I lived in Jordan for the better part of a year some years ago, and I got to a point where I realized that it was comfortable living there, but I didn't really belong. But I was so comfortable that how was I ever going to live back in California again?
Yeah.
And it took a few weeks, and then
Merely weeks. Yeah.
and then I got over it.
What are your hopes for the future? For the future of Islam in America?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I definitely hope that Islam becomes understood enough that people have an interest the way I see in Sonoma County, and an openness and an eagerness to learn about it and accept. Because that's what I hope for the world, is that people would figure out how to get along. And having information, having education, I think is a way of understanding people and getting along. But like I say, somebody's always got to be the goat. And I don't want anybody to be the goat.
Yeah. Where can we learn more about the Interfaith Council of Sonoma County?
ICSC, we have we're on Facebook. August 28th, we'll be at Presbyterian Church of the Roses for an afternoon workshops and gathering and dinner. And, but Interfaith Council of Sonoma County is on Facebook. I think that's
Place to start,
a good start.
Well,
Thank you,
Aisha,
Daedalus.
Aisha Jill Morgan, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time. Very edifying. Yeah, thank you. You too.